evidence.
Evidence that Julia's friendship with Eric is actually a year-long affair.
You're lying.
Am I? Because these are your text messages, Julia, your voice on these recordings.
They say trust is the foundation of marriage. What they don't tell you is that sometimes that foundation is built on quicksand, and you don't realize you're sinking until you're neck deep in betrayal. My name is Mark Sullivan, and I used to think I had it all figured out. Successful financial advisory practice, beautiful wife Julia, who owned the trendiest boutique in downtown Portland, and my 14-year-old son Ben, who inherited my sarcastic wit, but thankfully his mother's good looks. We lived in one of those picture-perfect neighborhoods where everyone knows everyone's business, which should have been my first warning sign. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. It was a Tuesday evening in October when my world imploded. Julia had insisted on hosting dinner for both our families and close friends, something she'd been pushing for weeks, with an urgency that should have raised red flags. But I was busy managing portfolios and didn't pay attention to the subtle signs that my marriage was about to become a cautionary tale. Our dining room was packed. Julia's mother, Margaret, sat at the head of the table like the queen bee she'd always been, surveying her domain with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. My parents had driven up from Eugene, looking slightly overwhelmed by Julia's elaborate spread. Ben sat next to me, rolling his eyes at the adult conversation, but staying for the promise of Julia's famous chocolate cake. Then there were Julia's friends, her inner circle of enablers who hung around the boutique like it was some sort of social headquarters. Lana, the neighborhood gossip who could spread news faster than wildfire, sat across from her best friend Carmen, who nodded along to everything Julia said like a bobblehead doll. And there was Josh, this smarmy guy who always seemed to show up wherever Julia's crowd gathered, making jokes that weren't quite funny enough to laugh at. But the guest who made my skin crawl was Eric Dorsey, Julia's ex-boyfriend from college who had somehow managed to worm his way back into her life over the past year. Tall, charming in that fake way that makes you want to punch something, and always touching Julia's arm when he talked to her. Julia insisted they were just friends and that I was being insecure whenever I brought up how inappropriate their relationship seemed. The conversation flowed easily enough at first. My dad was telling stories about his fishing trips, Margaret was holding court about the latest neighborhood drama, and Ben was texting under the table thinking nobody noticed. I was actually starting to relax when Julia suddenly stood up, tapping her wine glass with her fork. "I have something important to say," she announced, her voice carrying that theatrical tone she used when she wanted everyone's attention. The room fell silent. Mark and I have been together for 3 years, and we're supposed to get married next month. Supposed to. Past tense. My stomach dropped. But I need everyone to understand something, especially Mark. She looked directly at me, her green eyes cold in a way I'd never seen before. Eric is always going to be in my life. He's not just my ex, he's my closest friend, my confidant, someone I can't and won't give up. So if you can't handle that, Mark, then maybe we shouldn't get married at all. The silence was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking, the sound of someone's fork clinking against their plate, my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Every face around the table was frozen in shock, except for Eric, who was smirking like he'd just won some twisted game I didn't even know we were playing. My mother's face had gone pale. My father was gripping his napkin so hard his knuckles were white. Ben was staring at Julia like she'd grown a second head. Even Margaret looked stunned, though I caught something else in her expression. Was that approval? "Well," I said finally, my voice surprisingly steady, "I guess that answers that question." I stood up, folded my napkin neatly beside my plate, and looked around the table one more time. "Thank you all for coming tonight. I think we're done here." "Mark, wait," Julia started, but I was already walking away. "Dad," Ben called after me. "Stay and finish dinner, buddy. I'll see you at home later." I grabbed my jacket from the hall closet and walked out into the crisp October air, leaving behind the sound of urgent whispers and Julia's voice rising in what sounded like panic. The funny thing about having your life blow up in front of an audience is that you can't pretend it didn't happen. Everyone saw it. Everyone knew. As I drove home through the tree-lined streets of our neighborhood, past the houses where I'd built friendships and professional relationships over the past 5 years, I realized that Julia had just handed me something more valuable than she knew. She'd shown me exactly who she was, in front of witnesses, with no way to take it back. Trust, but verify. Or maybe just trust and get played. Either way, I was about to learn that revenge, like a good wine, improves with patience and proper planning. The next morning, I woke up to 43 missed calls and 67 text messages. Julia had apparently spent the night in full damage control mode, alternating between tearful apologies and angry demands that I stop being dramatic, and think about what's best for our family. Our family? Right. I made coffee and sat in my home office, staring at the wedding planning folder Julia had left on my desk. Venue deposits, catering contracts, flower arrangements, thousands of dollars committed to celebrating a union that had apparently been a joke from the beginning. The wedding was 3 weeks away, invitations had been sent, my parents had already booked their hotel. Ben wandered into the kitchen around 8, looking like he'd slept about as well as I had. "So," he said, pouring himself orange juice, "that was intense last night." That's one word for it. I studied my son's face, looking for signs of how much this was affecting him. "You okay, buddy?" He shrugged in that way teenagers do when they're trying to act like nothing bothers them. "I never liked Eric anyway. Guy's a tool." Despite everything, I almost smiled. Language. What? Tool isn't a bad word, it's just accurate. My phone buzzed again. Julia, of course. I declined the call and opened my laptop instead. "What are you doing?" Ben asked, peering over my shoulder. "Canceling a wedding." It took me 3 hours to unravel what had taken months to plan. The venue was surprisingly understanding. Apparently this wasn't their first last-minute cancellation. The caterer was less sympathetic, but agreed to refund half the deposit. The florist just sighed and said she'd try to resell the arrangements. Each phone call felt like removing a bandage, painful but necessary. By noon, I'd officially canceled our wedding and saved myself about $15,000 in the process. Money I could put toward a good lawyer if this got ugly. And judging by the increasingly frantic messages from Julia, it was going to get very ugly indeed. My best friend Paul showed up around lunchtime with sandwiches and that particular expression he wore when he was trying not to say, "I told you so." Paul worked in IT for a major firm downtown and had the kind of analytical mind that saw patterns where other people saw coincidences. He'd been suspicious of Julia's relationship with Eric from the beginning. "So," he said, settling into my kitchen chair, "want to talk about it?" "What's to talk about? My fiancée announced in front of God and everyone that her ex-boyfriend is more important than our marriage. Pretty straightforward." "It is. But you're too calm. The Mark I know would be throwing things and planning elaborate revenge schemes." I unwrapped my sandwich and considered this. Maybe I'm evolving. Or maybe you're planning something and don't want to tell me about it yet. Paul knew me too well. The truth was, I wasn't ready to make any moves yet. I needed information first. In financial planning, you never make major decisions without understanding all the variables. This situation required the same approach. "I need you to help me with something," I said finally. "Legal or illegal?" "Legal, mostly." Paul grinned. "Those are my favorite kind of favors." That afternoon, while Julia continued her text message campaign, Paul and I drove to her boutique. It was closed, unusual for a Wednesday, but through the window we could see Julia inside with her usual crowd. Lana was gesticulating wildly, probably rehashing every detail of last night's dinner for anyone who'd listen. Carmen was nodding along, as always, and there was Eric, sitting behind Julia's desk like he owned the place. "Interesting," Paul murmured, taking photos with his phone. For someone who's just a friend, he sure looks comfortable in her private office. We parked across the street at a coffee shop with a perfect view of the boutique's front door. Over the next 2 hours, we watched Eric come and go like he lived there. He had his own key. He answered the phone when Julia stepped away. He even handled a delivery, signing for packages with the casual authority of someone who'd done it many times before. "How long has this been going on?" Paul asked. "That's what I'm trying to figure out." My phone rang, Julia again. This time I answered. "Mark, thank God. We need to talk." "I think you said everything you needed to say last night." "I was drunk. I didn't mean it the way it sounded." I watched through the coffee shop window as Eric wrapped his arms around Julia from behind, kissing her neck while she talked on the phone. To me, while lying about what she'd meant. "Actually, Julia, I think you meant exactly what it sounded like." "Don't be ridiculous. You're being paranoid and jealous, and I'm being realistic. You chose Eric over me in front of our families and friends. That's not something you take back." "It's not like that." But I could see exactly what it was like, because Eric had just lifted Julia onto her desk and was kissing her in a way that definitely wasn't just friends. Paul followed my gaze and whistled low. "I have to go," I told Julia. "Mark, don't you dare hang up on me." I hung up. Then I blocked her number, her email, and all her social media accounts. Paul was already uploading the photos he'd taken to a secure cloud folder. "Evidence," he explained. "You're going to need it." That evening, Ben and I ordered pizza and watched a baseball game, pretending everything was normal. But around 9 o'clock, Julia showed up at our front door, pounding and shouting loud enough to wake the neighbors. "Mark, open this door right now. We need to talk." I looked out the window and saw her standing on our porch in the designer dress she'd probably worn to impress Eric, mascara streaked down her face, looking nothing like the composed woman who'd destroyed our relationship 12 hours earlier. "Should I call the cops?" Ben asked. "Not yet, but keep your phone ready." I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "What do you want, Julia?" "I want to fix this. I want to explain." "There's nothing to explain. You made your choice." "I didn't choose him over you." "Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you chose him a long time ago. The only thing that happened last night was you finally admitted it." She started crying then, the kind of dramatic sobbing that had always made me feel guilty before. But now I just felt tired. "Please, Mark. I love you. I want to marry you." "No, you don't. You want to have your cake and eat it too. You want the respectability of being married to me and the excitement of sneaking around with Eric. But that's not how this works." "You're wrong." "Am I? Then why does Eric have a key to your shop? Why was he in your office today, answering your phone and handling your business like he owns the place?" Her face went white. "You were spying on me?" "I was getting coffee. You were putting on a show." The fight went out of her then. She sagged against the doorframe, looking defeated. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered. "I want you to leave. I want you to stop calling and texting. I want you to figure out your life without dragging me and Ben through your drama." "And if I cut Eric out completely, if I never see him again?" I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "It's too late for that, Julia. You can't unsay what you said last night. You can't undo what you've been doing behind my back. And honestly, I don't want you to." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you did me a favor. You showed me who you really are before I made the biggest mistake of my life." I stepped back and started to close the door, but she grabbed my arm. "This isn't over, Mark." "Yes, it is." I closed the door and turned the deadbolt. Through the window, I watched her stand on my porch for another 5 minutes before finally getting in her car and driving away. "Dad?" Ben appeared in the hallway, looking worried. "It's okay, buddy. She's gone." "For good?" I thought about Eric's hands on Julia's waist, the way she'd lied to my face while he kissed her neck. The 3 years I'd wasted building a life with someone who was building a different life behind my back. "Yeah, for good." The next few days passed in a strange kind of peace. Julia had apparently gotten the message about leaving me alone, though I suspected that had more to do with Eric keeping her busy than any respect for my wishes. The neighborhood gossip mill was working overtime. I could see it in the way conversation stopped when I walked by, the way people looked at me with that mixture of pity and curiosity reserved for public relationship disasters. Margaret, Julia's mother, was apparently holding court at the country club, spinning the story to make her daughter look like the victim of my unreasonable jealousy. According to Lana, who couldn't resist sharing the drama with anyone who'd listen, I was controlling and couldn't handle Julia having male friends. The irony was delicious. If only they knew what I'd seen at the boutique. Paul had been busy with his own investigation, using his tech skills to dig up information about Eric that painted an interesting picture. The guy was charming, sure, but he was also broke, unemployed, and had a history of dating women who could support his lifestyle. Julia was just his latest mark. "Look at this," Paul said, showing me Eric's social media history on his laptop. We were sitting in my office on Saturday morning, drinking coffee and planning my next move. 3 long-term relationships in the past 5 years, all with successful women. A lawyer, a real estate agent, and a restaurant owner. Notice a pattern? I scrolled through the photos. Eric at expensive restaurants, on vacation in places he couldn't afford, wearing clothes that cost more than most people's rent, all funded by whatever woman he was dating at the time. "He's a professional boyfriend," I said. "Exactly. And now he's got Julia convinced that he's her soulmate who just needs a little help getting back on his feet." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I nearly dropped the phone. It was a screenshot of a conversation between Julia and Eric, sent from a number I didn't recognize. The message thread was explicit, graphic, and dated from 2 weeks before our dinner party disaster. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning it, discussing how to handle Mark, and whether Julia should just break up with him now or wait until after the wedding. "Jesus," Paul breathed, reading over my shoulder. The final message in the thread was from Eric. "Don't worry, baby. Once you're married, his money becomes our money. We can string him along for a year or two, then take half of everything in the divorce." I stared at the screen, feeling something cold and sharp settle in my chest. This wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated fraud. They'd been planning to rob me blind from the beginning. "Who sent this?" Paul asked. Another text came through from the same unknown number. "Someone who thinks you deserve better. There's more where this came from. Check your email." I opened my laptop and found an email from a throwaway account with no identifying information. The subject line read, "The whole truth." Inside were dozens of screenshots, photos, and even audio recordings of Julia and Eric discussing their plan to use me for my money while continuing their relationship behind my back. "This is incredible," Paul said, scrolling through the evidence. "Someone really has it out for them. Or someone has a conscience." The evidence painted a picture that was even worse than I'd imagined. Julia and Eric had been together for over a year, meeting at hotels, planning elaborate lies to cover their tracks, and laughing about how clueless I was. The boutique was failing, had been failing for months, and Julia saw marriage to me as her financial salvation. But the most damning piece of evidence was a recording of Julia talking to Eric about Ben. "The kid likes you," she was saying. "That's good. It'll make the transition easier when we get rid of Mark. What if he doesn't want to live with us full time? He won't have a choice. I'll make sure Mark looks like an unfit father. Maybe plant some drugs in his house or claim he's been drinking too much. Whatever it takes." I had to stop the recording. My hands were shaking with rage. "They were going to frame you," Paul said quietly, "and take Ben." That crossed a line I didn't even know existed. Cheating on me was one thing. Stealing my money was another. But threatening my son? That was war. I spent the rest of the weekend planning. Not some half-baked revenge fantasy, but a careful, methodical campaign designed to expose Julia and Eric for what they really were. I had the evidence. I had the moral high ground. And I had something they'd underestimated: patience. Monday morning, I started making calls. First to my lawyer, who nearly choked on his coffee when I played him the recordings. Then to my accountant, making sure all my assets were protected and properly documented. Then to Ben's school, alerting them that under no circumstances should Julia be allowed to pick him up or make any decisions about his education. "Is there something I should know?" asked Mrs. Peterson, the principal. "Just that Julia and I are no longer together, and I have full custody. If she shows up claiming otherwise, call me immediately." By Tuesday, I was ready to make my first move. Julia's crowd always met for lunch at this trendy cafe downtown, the same place where the show had been gossiping about my controlling behavior all week. I happened to know they'd reserved their usual table for noon. At 11:58, I walked into the cafe with a manila envelope full of printed screenshots and sat down at the table right next to theirs. When Julia, Lana, Carmen, and Josh arrived, they froze like deer in headlights. "Mark," Julia said, trying to sound pleased to see me. "What are you doing here?" "Having lunch. Don't mind me." They sat down reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with my presence. I ordered a sandwich and pretended to read the newspaper while listening to their conversation. "So anyway," Lana was saying, "Margaret thinks you should just give him some time to cool off. Men hate being embarrassed in public." "I wasn't trying to embarrass him," Julia protested. "I was just being honest about my friendship with Eric." "Friendship," I said loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Mark, please don't make a scene." "Oh, I'm not making a scene. But I do have something that might interest your friends." I opened the manila envelope and spread the screenshots across their table like I was dealing cards. Julia's face went white. Carmen gasped. Josh leaned forward to get a better look, then immediately leaned back like he'd been burned. "What is this?" Lana demanded. "Evidence," I said calmly. "Evidence that Julia's friendship with Eric is actually a year-long affair, complete with plans to defraud me out of my money and take my son away from me." "You're lying," Julia whispered. "Am I?" "Because these are your text messages, Julia. Your voice on these recordings. Your plan to handle Mark and take half of everything in a divorce." The cafe had gone quiet around us. Other diners were openly staring now, drawn by the drama unfolding at our table. "Where did you get these?" Julia asked. "Does it matter? The question is, are they real?" She couldn't answer, because we both knew they were. Lana was reading the screenshots with growing horror. Carmen had gone pale. Josh was already backing away from the table, like he wanted to distance himself from the whole situation. "Julia," Lana said slowly, "please tell me this isn't what it looks like." "It's not. I can explain." "You called me a useful idiot for helping you cover your tracks," Carmen read from one of the screenshots. "You said I was too stupid to figure out what was really going on." "Carmen, that's not..." "And you told Eric that Lana was a gossipy snake who would spread whatever story we feed her." The table erupted. Lana started shouting at Julia about being used and lied to. Carmen was crying, asking how Julia could say such horrible things about her friends. Josh was trying to sneak away without being noticed. I stood up, leaving the evidence scattered across their table. "Ladies," I said politely, "enjoy your lunch." As I walked away, I could hear the argument escalating behind me. By tonight, everyone in our social circle would know the truth about Julia and Eric. By tomorrow, it would be all over town. Phase 1 was complete. The fallout from the cafe confrontation was swift and brutal. By Wednesday morning, Julia's boutique had lost 3 major clients who'd heard about the scandal. Her landlord was asking questions about her ability to make rent, and her inner circle of friends had turned into her worst enemies, spreading every detail of her deception to anyone who would listen. Margaret called me that afternoon, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Mark, we need to talk." "I don't think we do, Margaret." "My daughter made a mistake, but this public humiliation has gone far enough." "Your daughter didn't make a mistake. She made a choice, multiple choices, over the course of a year to lie to me and plan to steal from me. You don't understand the pressure she's been under. The pressure of running a failing business, the pressure of maintaining a lifestyle she couldn't afford. I understand perfectly. What I don't understand is why you think any of that justifies what she did." There was a long pause. Then, "What do you want?" "I want to be left alone. I want Julia to stay away from Ben and me. And I want everyone to stop pretending this is somehow my fault." "And if she does that? If she cuts all contact? Then we can all move on with our lives." But Julia wasn't ready to move on. Thursday evening, she showed up at Ben's soccer practice with Eric in tow, making a show of playing the supportive stepmother while Eric tried to buddy up to the other parents. It was a calculated move designed to make me look like the bad guy for keeping her away from Ben. I watched from the bleachers as she worked the crowd, probably spinning some story about our misunderstanding and how she was just trying to do what was best for Ben. A few of the parents seemed to be buying it, the ones who didn't know the whole story yet. Then Eric made his mistake. He walked over to where I was sitting, that same smirk on his face that I'd seen at the dinner party. "Mark, buddy, we need to clear the air." "We really don't." "Look, I know this is awkward, but Julia and I want to find a way to make this work, for Ben's sake." "Ben's sake?" "Yeah, the kid needs stability. He needs to see the adults in his life getting along." I stood up slowly, keeping my voice low enough that the other parents couldn't hear, but loud enough that Eric got the message. "Let me be very clear about something. You are not an adult in Ben's life. You are not his stepfather, his mentor, or his friend. You are a con artist who seduced his mother for money. And if you ever try to insert yourself into my son's life again, I will make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of man you really are." Eric's smirk faltered. "You can't threaten me." "I'm not threatening you. I'm educating you. There's a difference." I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo Paul had taken earlier that week, Eric coming out of a pawn shop with a bag full of jewelry that looked suspiciously like pieces I'd seen Julia wearing. "Funny thing about pawn shops," I said conversationally. "They keep very detailed records of everything they buy. Serial numbers, descriptions, photos. I wonder what we'd find if someone reported some stolen jewelry." His face went white. "That's not stolen. Julia gave me those pieces." "To pawn? How romantic." "You don't know what you're talking about. I know that Julia's been funding your lifestyle for months. I know her business is failing because she's been siphoning money to support you. And I know that when this all falls apart, and it will, you'll disappear and leave her holding the bag." Eric glanced around nervously, probably realizing that several other parents were starting to pay attention to our conversation. "This isn't over," he muttered. "Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet." He walked away, and I noticed that Julia was watching us from across the field with a worried expression. Good. She should be worried. Friday brought a new development. Paul called me at work with barely contained excitement. "You're going to love this," he said. "Remember that mysterious person who sent you all the evidence about Julia and Eric? What about them?" "I think I figured out who it is. Carmen." "Carmen? Julia's friend Carmen?" "Ex-friend Carmen. Turns out she's been in love with Julia for years. She was hoping that if she helped expose Eric, Julia would realize she'd been with the wrong person all along. That's complicated. It gets better. Carmen has been documenting everything for months. She has recordings, photos, financial records, enough evidence to bury both Julia and Eric if this goes to court. Why is she helping me? Because she finally realized that Julia is never going to love her back, and she's pissed about being called a useful idiot in those text messages. That afternoon, I met Carmen at a quiet coffee shop across town. She looked terrible, dark circles under her eyes, like she hadn't been sleeping. But her voice was steady when she spoke. "I want to help you destroy them," she said without preamble. "That's a strong word. It's the right word. Julia has been using people her entire life. Using me, using you, using everyone who cares about her. And Eric is just as bad. She slid a flash drive across the table. Everything's on there. Bank records showing how she's been moving money from the boutique to pay Eric's expenses. Hotel receipts from their trips together. Even recordings of them laughing about how stupid we all are. Carmen, why are you doing this? Because I loved her. Really loved her. And I thought if I helped her, if I covered for her, if I was the perfect friend, maybe someday she'd see me the way I saw her. She laughed bitterly. But she never did. To her, I was just another useful idiot. Someone to manipulate and discard when I wasn't needed anymore. I pocketed the flash drive. What do you want in return? I want to watch her world burn. I want everyone to see what she really is. And I want her to know that I'm the one who brought her down. That's a lot of anger. 3 years of unrequited love and emotional manipulation will do that to a person. Sunday morning, I made my final preparations. I'd spent the weekend going through Carmen's evidence, organizing it into a comprehensive dossier that painted a clear picture of Julia and Eric's fraud. I'd also done some research into Eric's background, discovering a pattern of similar scams with other women in other cities. The plan was simple, but devastating. Julia's boutique was hosting a charity fashion show that evening, a big social event that would draw everyone from our circle. All the people who'd been gossiping about our breakup, taking sides, spreading rumors, they'd all be there, dressed up and ready to be entertained. I was going to give them a show they'd never forget. Ben was spending the night at my parents' house. I didn't want him anywhere near what was about to happen. Paul had volunteered to help with the technical aspects, and Carmen was ready to play her part in exposing the woman who'd broken her heart. As I put on my best suit and checked my appearance in the mirror, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Anticipation. Tonight, Julia and Eric were going to learn that actions have consequences, and everyone who'd been whispering about my jealousy and controlling behavior was going to see the truth. The charity fashion show was about to become a very different kind of spectacle. The charity fashion show was being held at the Riverside Hotel's Grand Ballroom, the same venue where Julia and I were supposed to have our wedding reception. The irony wasn't lost on me as I walked through the elegant space, noting the strategic placement of projection screens and sound equipment that would make my presentation visible and audible to everyone in attendance. Julia had outdone herself with the event planning. The ballroom was packed with Portland's social elite, local business owners, and everyone from our extended social circle. She stood near the entrance in a stunning red dress, playing the role of gracious hostess, while Eric lingered nearby in a rented tuxedo that probably cost more than he'd made in the past 6 months. Paul was already in position at the sound booth, posing as a member of the technical crew. Carmen sat at a table near the front, looking nervous but determined. Margaret held court at the VIP table, surrounded by her country club friends who were no doubt eager for more gossip about her daughter's dramatic love life. I found my assigned seat. Julia had apparently decided to keep me close, probably hoping to control any potential drama. The table included several couples from our neighborhood, all of whom greeted me with that careful politeness people use when they are not sure which side of a scandal to support. "Mark," said Janet Morrison, who lived 3 houses down from me, "how are you holding up?" "Better than expected," I replied, adjusting my cufflinks. "Tonight should be enlightening." The fashion show began promptly at 7, with local models showcasing pieces from Julia's boutique and other participating stores. Julia had positioned herself at the podium between segments, introducing each designer and thanking the sponsors. She was in her element, charming, confident, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse. During the intermission, I excused myself and walked to the sound booth where Paul was waiting. "Everything ready?" I asked. "Locked and loaded. You sure you want to do this?" She was going to take Ben away from me, Paul. She was going to frame me as an unfit father and steal my son. After that, I'm sure about everything. I returned to my seat just as Julia took the podium for the second half of the show. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "before we continue with tonight's fashion presentations, I'd like to take a moment to address some recent rumors and misunderstandings." This wasn't part of the planned program. Julia was going off script, probably hoping to get ahead of the gossip by controlling the narrative. As many of you know, my fiancé Mark and I recently ended our engagement. It's been a difficult time for both of us, but I want everyone to understand that we're committed to remaining friends and co-parenting Ben with love and respect. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Eric was nodding supportively from his position near the bar. Margaret looked pleased that her daughter was taking control of the situation. Unfortunately, there have been some hurtful accusations and false rumors circulating about my personal life. I want to set the record straight once and for all. That was my cue. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to Paul. Now. The lights dimmed slightly, and one of the projection screens flickered to life. Instead of fashion photos, the audience was suddenly looking at a text message conversation between Julia and Eric, blown up large enough for everyone in the ballroom to read clearly. Julia's voice faltered as she realized what was happening. What is? Turn that off. But Paul was in control of the technical equipment now, and the show was just beginning. The text messages scrolled slowly, giving everyone time to read Julia's explicit descriptions of her affair with Eric and their plans to handle Mark after the wedding. Oh my God, someone whispered loudly enough to be heard across the room. The projection switched to hotel receipts showing Julia and Eric's romantic getaways, all paid for with money from the boutique's business account. Then came the bank records showing systematic transfers from the store's operating funds to Eric's personal account. Julia was frantically gesturing to the hotel staff, trying to get them to shut down the projection system, but they were as mesmerized by the unfolding drama as everyone else. "This is private information," she shouted into the microphone. "Someone is violating my privacy." Privacy? I stood up, my voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. You mean like the privacy you violated when you recorded me without my knowledge? Like the privacy you violated when you planned to plant drugs in my house to make me look like an unfit father? The audience gasped. Margaret's face had gone ashen. The projection screen now showed a timeline of Julia's deception, complete with dates, financial transactions, and photographic evidence of her year-long affair. Every lie she'd told, every manipulation she'd orchestrated, every plan she'd made to destroy my life. It was all there, presented with the kind of meticulous detail that left no room for denial. "Ladies and gentlemen," I continued, walking toward the front of the room, "you wanted to know the truth about why our engagement ended. Here it is. Julia didn't just cheat on me. She orchestrated an elaborate fraud designed to steal my money, take my son, and destroy my reputation, all while pretending to be the victim of my controlling behavior." Eric was trying to slip toward the exit, but Carmen had positioned herself to block his path. When he tried to push past her, she spoke loudly enough for half the room to hear. "Going somewhere, Eric? Don't you want to stay and explain to everyone how you've been living off Julia's money while planning to abandon her once the con was complete?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Eric protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Carmen smiled coldly. "Really? Because I have recordings of you telling me exactly that. You said Julia was desperate and pathetic, and that you were just milking her for everything she's worth, until you found a better target." The projection screen now showed Eric's dating history, photos of him with the lawyer, the real estate agent, the restaurant owner, all successful women who'd supported him financially before he moved on to his next victim. Julia was crying now, mascara streaming down her face as she realized the full scope of her exposure. "Please," she said into the microphone, "this isn't what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," I replied. "And everyone here can see that now." Margaret stood up shakily, her face a mask of humiliation and rage. "Julia, how could you do this? How could you embarrass our family like this?" "Mom, I can explain." "Explain what? That you're a liar and a cheat? That you were willing to destroy a good man and steal his child for money?" The ballroom had erupted into dozens of conversations as people processed what they'd witnessed. Some were taking photos of the projection screens. Others were already heading for the exits, eager to spread the news. A few were approaching me with expressions of sympathy and support, but I wasn't done yet. "There's one more thing," I announced, and the room fell silent again. "Julia, you said Eric would always be in your life. You were right about that. But what you didn't realize is that con artists don't stick around when their marks become liabilities." I looked directly at Eric, who was still trying to find a way out of the ballroom without causing more of a scene. "Tell her, Eric. Tell Julia what you told Carmen about your exit strategy. Tell her about the other women you've been texting while living off her money. Tell her about the job interview you had in Seattle last week, the fresh start you're planning without her." Eric's face went white. Julia turned to stare at him with growing horror. "Eric?" she whispered. "Is that true?" He looked around the room at hundreds of faces staring at him with disgust and contempt, and something in him cracked. "This is insane," he said loudly. "You're all insane. Julia, you're pathetic and desperate, and I never loved you. I was just using you for money, and now that everyone knows what a lying snake you are, you're worthless to me anyway." The silence that followed was deafening. Julia staggered backward like she'd been slapped. Even Margaret looked shocked by Eric's casual cruelty. "There's your soulmate," I said quietly. "There's the man you chose over your family." Eric pushed his way through the crowd toward the exit, leaving Julia alone on the stage, crying and humiliated in front of everyone she'd ever known. But I wasn't finished with either of them yet. "One final thing," I called out as Eric reached the door. "The jewelry you pawned last week, the pieces you claimed Julia gave you, I've already reported them stolen. The police are waiting for you in the lobby." Eric froze, his hand on the door handle. "You see, Julia reported those pieces missing from her home safe 3 months ago, claiming they were stolen in a burglary. Insurance paid out $25,000. But pawnshop records show you selling them last Tuesday. That's insurance fraud, Eric, and theft. Enjoy explaining that to the Portland Police Bureau." Security guards appeared at the exits as if on cue. Paul had called them earlier, giving them everything they needed to make the arrest. Eric tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. As the police led Eric away in handcuffs, I walked back to my table and picked up my jacket. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the stunned crowd, "thank you for a lovely evening. I think we can all agree that the truth is much more entertaining than fashion." I headed for the exit, leaving behind the chaos of Julia's destroyed reputation, her mother's humiliation, and the scattered remains of the life she'd tried to build on lies and manipulation. In the parking lot, Paul was waiting by my car with a huge grin on his face. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about it for a moment. 3 weeks ago, I'd been planning a wedding to a woman who was planning to destroy me. Tonight, that woman was facing bankruptcy, social exile, and possible criminal charges, while her partner in crime was on his way to jail. "I feel," I said finally, "like justice has been served." Carmen appeared beside us, looking satisfied but exhausted. "It's over," she said simply. "For all of us," I agreed. As we drove away from the hotel, leaving behind the wreckage of Julia and Eric's elaborate deception, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about revealing the truth and letting people see exactly who they've been dealing with all along. Julia had been right about one thing. Eric would always be in her life. He'd be there in the criminal trial, in the bankruptcy proceedings, and in the memories of everyone who'd witnessed her spectacular downfall. But I wouldn't be there. Ben and I were finally free to build a life based on honesty instead of lies, trust instead of manipulation, and genuine love instead of calculated deception. The X factor had been eliminated once and for all.